This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Stefanski and Andrew Berry on the hot seat. Should they be on the hot seat after a disappointing week one? Look, spoiler warning, my answer to this is no. I don't think that they should be on the hot seat. Am I critical of how Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski handled the offseason, handled training camp? Absolutely. And I'll get into my criticisms with that in a minute. Am I critical with how Kevin Stefanski handled this game, handled the game planning in the game, and possibly managed the situation at the quarterback position? Yeah, I'm frustrated with it. Do I think that these are fireable offenses at the 1 week of football? No. And also, if you're asking me the question, do I think the season is over because of everything that we saw in week one? I don't. I think there's a chance the Browns can still put together there is a strong chance, in my opinion, that the Browns can put together a strong season. It's going to depend on some improvements from some players, obviously. But I still think there's a good chance that the Browns can put together a good season here. But let's talk about my criticisms of everything Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry related. Now, I don't know who's responsible for what. I don't know who specifically made what decision. When it comes to Andrew Berry, we have to acknowledge at this point, he has taken some risk on some personalities that just haven't worked out. And he continues to take risk on personalities that have just worked out. Now, I think the ones that bug people the most are the ones who have more criminal things about them that pop up, right? You know, the Mike Halls, the Perion Winfreys, and we'll see what happens with Mike Hall's situation. And I think that does bug people because it is embarrassing to have to talk about that with your football team. But also you end up in this weird place where you have to kind of like defend yourself by saying every other team does it. And nobody feels good being in that place. So that's a valid point of criticism. And I think the thing that makes it a very valid point of criticism, as my partner on my podcast, Q and Cole, says, is if you look at the Browns' best players, they're not the guys you take a risk on with character issues. They're very rarely those guys. I mean, they're never those guys. The guys that work out are the dudes who don't have the character issues. Like, there's this thought process that you got to draft troubled personalities in order to get value in the back end of the draft. The Browns have been able to get value in the back end of the draft without having to draft troublemakers. Some of those guys, Martin Emerson, there's not a spot on his record. He's not a bad person. He's not been arrested. He didn't drop in the draft because of character concerns. Ended up being a very good player, strong leader for this football team. So it's not like a necessary evil. It's just something that they have a tendency to do, and they clearly don't have a good judge on it. It keeps blowing up in their face. You know, you got Deshaun Watson dealing with another case, potentially facing another suspension. You know, this, whatever they're doing to judge or to investigate whether a player's character concerns are going to pop up again, clearly aren't working out. And they need to reevaluate that process. And that's squarely on Andrew Berry, right? You would love if your second round pick would be playing football for you. But instead, he's on the commissioner's exempt list. You would love if a extremely talented player like Perion Winfrey was playing for you on this defensive line, but end up having to get cut because of legal issues. Malik McDowell would be great if he could still be on the team, but he had to get cut because of legal issues. Can't keep doing it. Got to adjust that. If you're going to take a risk on a player, you got to be way more sure than you've been. Another criticism about how they kind of organized this offseason is that I don't think that they had a very strong training camp. From all accounts, it doesn't feel like the Browns had the most competitive camp that they could add. It feels like they were prioritizing health because health was such an issue last year that they kind of sacrifice competition, they sacrifice enthusiasm, and they sacrifice energy and overall preparedness to get there. I think it matters. I know a lot of people will tell you the only thing that matters is getting healthy. I don't think that's the case. You got to get these guys prepared. And to get these guys prepared, you got to be comfortable with risking some level of injury. It sucks. It's not good, and it really sucks when it happens. But you got to do it. That's how you run a good camp. That's how you get your guys prepared to play football. You're not going to get guys prepared to play football on styrofoam, on bubble wrap. You're not going to be able to do it. They got to play preseason games. They got to play in the preseason. They got to be tackled. They got to take hits. They got to play football. Now, if you want everybody out there to wear Guardian caps, be safe, cool. But as long as they playing football, I got no problem with it. The problem is we ain't playing football. And this is not something that Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry had an issue with the year prior or the year before that. I think this was solely a knee-jerk reaction to what happened last year. And I don't like that. You had a process that worked. It worked in 2021. It worked in 2020. It worked in 2022. Get these guys prepared. Play them in the preseason. Remember how strong the defense came out swinging last year in the opener? Remember how much they played in the preseason last year? Remember how much they played during training camp? How much we heard about them during training camp? And then juxtapose that with the offense this year. It's no wonder it was a completely different story. I believe that Kevin Stefanski is a competent offensive coordinator and an offensive head coach. I believe that Ken Dorsey is a competent offensive coordinator. And it makes no sense that those two could not cook up something competent. And we could blame it 100% on Deshaun Watson if you want to, but it's not 100% on Deshaun Watson. This was on them too. Doesn't take any blame away from Deshaun Watson. But it does mean that these two, they should look at themselves too. They contributed to that problem. They made it worse. They made what should have probably been like a 20 QBR game, a 9 QBR game. 20 is not acceptable either. Just to put it out there. 20 is not acceptable either. But damn, you might have been able to be within one score with a 20 QBR game, as bad as that is. Got to be more prepared than this. Now, a lot of this is going to really depend how I feel with Kevin, how he responds this week, right? It was a bad game plan. But if he comes out, the game plan's good next week to play good against the Jacksonville Jaguars and they beat a good Jacksonville team, then okay, cool. Not really tripping on that, right? But as of right now, I do think that's a bit of a concern. Another thing that's a concern with Kevin Stefanski, and again, this is another thing that you could blame 100% on Deshaun Watson, but I don't think that's accurate to do, and it's not productive to do either, which is third year we've been talking about new offense, running new concepts on offense, doing new things on offense. Third year. We've been talking about this 3 years in a row. I've been here every year. Third year. And it's also the third year we're talking about the offense not looking great week one. Again, you can blame Deshaun Watson for this, but Deshaun Watson didn't play week one in 2022. Got to have these guys more prepared offensively. Got to have this thing running a little bit more crisp than it has been, right? Not a great offensive output. I mean, any week one of Kevin Stefanski's career, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think has had a good offensive output. 2020 didn't have a great offensive output. 2021, I don't believe, had a great offensive output. 2022 did not have a great offensive output. In 2023 did not have a great offensive output. Got to have the offense looking a little bit more prepared week one. And that's partly on Kevin Stefanski and it's partly on Ken Dorsey as well. Didn't like that they abandoned the run game against Dallas, especially at the points of the game where it was obvious that the defense was going to be able to get the ball back. Like after the Browns scored that touchdown and then they got the 3 and out and they had the whole third quarter to come back and really try to like play their game and get comfortable in the offense. They tried to like strike and get a big play, get some screens going. I didn't like that. I didn't like the game plan. I didn't like the play calling in this game. We called like a couple of screens in this game, and we'll see if that's on Deshaun Watson or not. But didn't like that. Didn't like that at all. Even if you're not 100% trusting of your quarterback, you gotta call a ballsier game plan than that, because what's the difference if your quarterback executes it well or not? I mean, it's just not good. I don't love how they went about that game. Ultimately, I do think Kevin Stefanski is an excellent head. Ultimately, I do think Kevin Stefanski is a really good head coach. I do think that Andrew Berry is a pretty damn good GM. And I don't think these guys are above making mistakes or having bad weeks in their job. Just when you got something to be critical about them, I think it's fair to be critical about these guys without necessarily calling for their job to be in question or something like that. So another element to this about if Kevin AB should be on the hot seat is the current state of Deshaun Watson's play. It's not been great. And especially coming off of what you could argue is his worst game ever as a Cleveland Browns from certain metrics. It certainly is by a significant margin. The question is, hey, should heads roll for this failure at quarterback that has been the Deshaun Watson project so far? And I'm not gonna lie, there's some traditional arguments that make sense for saying yes. Usually when something like this happens, you do get rid of the head coach and the GM that were in charge when that happened. And you can argue about whether this was solely a Jimmy Haslam move or if this were something that it was just Jimmy and AB involved and Kevin had no say in it. I find those kind of theories hard to believe. I think all three of them were in on this, right? I think Kevin wanted Deshaun. I think AB wanted Deshaun. And I think Jimmy Haslam wanted Deshaun. And I think, to be fair to all of them, they thought they were getting the Deshaun Watson that they saw in 2020. And they thought that that would be an immediate upgrade and an elite level quarterback. And I don't think anybody foresaw Deshaun Watson playing to as low as, like, nobody saw that we would be talking about 3 sub 20 QBR games with Deshaun Watson out of 13. Nobody saw that coming when they made that move. Not even the most negative person about the trade at that time would have gone and said something like that, right? The common narrative was, yeah, he'll be good, but like at what cost? It wasn't the assumption that he was going to be a horrible player. So this being this big of a failure at this point, right? It could change technically, but at this point, it feels like a failure. This is usually something that head coaches and GMs do roll for, but I think Kevin and AB have done some key things in between all of this Deshaun Watson chaos that is going to keep him safe, and I think should keep him safe, because if we're talking about the long-term viability of this franchise, it's important that these two probably remain in power. So one reason and one thing that they did over the Deshaun Watson period that kind of helped them make a case for them staying, even if this thing does not work out with Deshaun, is they have had success with other quarterbacks. Kevin Stefanski had a top 10 offense with Jacoby Brissett 2 years ago. He had a top 10 offense with Jacoby Brissett. He got Joe Flacco to the point to where Joe Flacco won comeback player of the year. You got good games out of PJ Walker, and you won a game with DTR when he was clearly not at the point to where he was ready to be out there. Kevin has had success with a lot of different quarterbacks. And even with Deshaun Watson, the win-loss record with Deshaun Watson out there is still above 500, despite the games not being up to that par, which is another feather in Kevin Stefanski's cap. He's won games with Baker Mayfield. He's won games with Case Keenum. He's won games with a number of quarterbacks. And that would suggest to me that if you are going to bring in a new quarterback to develop, you would probably want Kevin Stefanski in charge of that. Also, Andrew Berry has had success finding guys that Kevin can work with in between these times where Deshaun Watson is in and out the lineup. And if that continues to be true, if we see Jameis Winston this year and you see moderate success out of Jameis Winston, that means to me that that's a pairing that you would want to be able to draft the quarterback that they really like in the draft. Yes, the Deshaun Watson thing didn't work out. Yes, it looks like this Deshaun Watson thing is on the verge of not working out in a big way. But if that is the case and you do have to move on, there is a lot of evidence there to suggest that you want Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski to head the charge to get the next guy in the draft, more than likely. And I just would like to open our imaginations to something that we've never experienced as Cleveland Browns fans. Imagine if the Browns could draft the quarterback in the first round and like that guy doesn't have to deal with a bunch of different head coaches and a bunch of different GMs and a bunch of different offensive coordinators. Like, imagine if the Browns could draft the quarterback, develop that quarterback. Well, not only draft that quarterback for a specific system and style, develop that quarterback in that system and style, allow that quarterback to grow and mature properly, and then have that quarterback blossom for your team. It would be awesome, right? Part of the Browns' problem since 99 is that they've been trying to develop quarterbacks with no foundation. And quite frankly, without really risking enough to get a quarterback. So if I'm Jimmy Haslam, I would definitely, even if this Deshaun Watson thing blows up in the biggest way possible, would keep Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, because I think those two are going to be the key to making sure you don't end up in another 20-year drought at the quarterback position, and that you wrap this thing up pretty quickly. I mean, again, got good quarterback play out of a lot of different guys. I really wouldn't be surprised if they could get something out of Jameis. I really wouldn't be surprised if they could find a way to conjure something out of whatever is going on with Deshaun Watson. And I wouldn't be surprised if DTR had to play, they could conjure something up out of that. And if you feel like you have that at the coaching position and at the GM position, then you got to trust that going into the draft. So that's also another reason why I would consider firing them. That's a little bit of a bigger overall reason. I know that's part of why I think a lot of people would consider it. That's where I'm at with those two. I'm really just looking forward to week 2 at this point. I want to see what looks different, right? If week 1 to week 2 is supposed to be your biggest improvement of the year, I'm really interested to see what looks different for this Cleveland Browns team, because it's got to look different, don't it? Let me know what y'all think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.